everybody, welcome every one of you to the Witness to Innocence, Accuracy, and Justice workshop. These are workshops that we put together with stakeholders and people throughout the country to see what witness innocence is all about. Accuracy and justice basically is the systemic issues that's happened to each one of our cases, and we try to let you all know exactly what some of our cases are. Now, I am the executive director of Witness Innocence. I've been at the helm for about almost going on 2 years. And we had started, I just thought this was the most interesting thing. We have talked to prosecutors from Larry Krasner here in Philly, excuse me, and others in Colorado, in California, and Washington State, and all over the country. And we would love to have been with you guys in person. And we talked to prosecutors, police officers, folks that have this occur. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Richard Dieter. He's our treasury on the board of directors, but he used to be the executive director of Death Penalty Information Center in Washington, D.C., and a good friend. I've known him for many years. And he's going to let you know about the cast and everybody else. So sit back, and I would like to tell you to enjoy it, but what you're about to hear is some horrible stuff. So, Richard.
Thank you, Kirk. I know that all of you who are on the call here know these are difficult times, unusual times, and probably there's other things that you have to attend to, but you've given us some of your time, and we really appreciate that. As Kirk said, we've done these accuracy and justice workshops for the offices of various district attorneys around the country, and for some judges and other gatherings. Not because we are the experts on prosecution or even criminal justice, and not certainly because just we want to talk about the death penalty. All of the people you'll hear from today were sentenced to death, but these workshops are trying to get at the problem of wrongful conviction, whether it be in capital cases or ordinary cases, and how we can adjust as a society to this new normal in a way. We were in a new normal with the pandemic crisis, but we're also in a new normal with the criminal justice system. It used to be that innocence was a far out issue. If you had a fair trial, you had your chance to present the facts. And if you didn't get a fair trial, you could appeal it. But the facts were the facts. But we've learned a lot. And I think the stories that you'll hear today from three of Witness to Innocence finest representatives, all three of them have been in leadership positions in this organization. All three have traveled not only in the U.S. but around the world, speaking about their cases. And when they got off of death row, they could have been doing other things, like we all probably would have. But they decided to devote a significant part of their time to trying to make sure that these kinds of mistakes don't happen again. And so I'm privileged. I'm not going to introduce each of them other than to say we have Kwame and Sabrina and Kirk speaking in that order, because they will introduce themselves. They will tell their stories better than ever I certainly could. And at the end of that, I'll ask some questions that hopefully will get at some of the causes of wrongful convictions. If we had more time, more dialogue would be spent in that phase, and we'd want to hear from everybody about how to change things. We'll do a little of that, and we'll leave it wide open for your questions, whether they be questions about any of the cases to the people who presented, or questions about how these workshops might work for you in the future when we can come together, or we're ready to do this as a virtual workshop, which is the way a lot of things are happening. So I'm going to ask that each of the speakers speak for about 10 minutes, and that they introduce themselves, and that we hold questions till all three have spoken and I get a chance to ask a few. So we'll start with Kwame. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Kwame Kamau Ajamu, formerly Ronnie Patrick Bridgman. And today marks a very historical day, as 45 years ago to the very day, May 19th, 1975, 3 young Black boys were arrested, tried and convicted, and sentenced to die in Cleveland, Ohio's death penalty. One of those boys was just a 17-year-old kid. That would be me. The other one was an 18-year-old kid. That would be my friend, Ricky Jackson. And the third one would be a 20-year-old young man. That would be my older brother, Wally Bridgman. It would take 28 years of my life struggling after 3 years on death row and 25 years incarcerated in Ohio's worst penal institutions before I was paroled into society and thus able to seek the legal vengeance that I needed to free both my brother and my friend from prison, which took yet another 11 years, leading those 2 men to serve 39 years of their lives incarcerated for a crime that we had not did. On May 19th, 1975, in the city of Cleveland, Ohio, a young man by the name of Harold J. Franks, 59 years old, Caucasian, United States money order salesman, entered the neighborhood of Fair Hill and Cedar, where we were living. Upon entering or leaving that neighborhood, Mr. Franks was accosted, robbed of not only his liberty, but his life. Ultimately, the proprietor of the store would be struck in the neck. Her name is Anna Robinson, as she veered out the door window to see what was going on in front of her store. There was a young kid there, 12 years old, who said that, "I know who did it." He was immediately corralled by the police, taken into police custody, and some 90 days later, he would come to court and say that, "I did it, my brother did it, and my friend did it." He would testify in 4 different trials to that effect. It would take all of 45 years before the truth would be revealed. It would take all of 28 years before someone who would be able, like myself, to have gone through the system, made actually a parole of status in the system of my merits, to come out into society and fight for the freedom of not only my brother and my friend, but the liberties taken from our identities and social beings. It would take 45 years of cruelty, punishment, police misconduct, prosecution misconduct, coercion, all of the things that add up to wrongful incarceration and mass incarceration. And yet we were also sentenced to die. Can you imagine 17 years old sentenced to die for a crime you didn't do? There's no more anything of joy. Hope is lost. Victory comes when you are able to serve, as I am now, a servant to witness to innocence, chair of the board of this great, magnificent organization that fights not only in America, but around the world for freedom and for liberty. If there's anything that haven't been wrongfully incarcerated as a juvenile raised by the state, that I could leave unto your memories until there's no more, I would say to you, to all of you, reconsider what you think about capital punishment. Reconsider how juveniles spend their time incarcerated. And above all, fight as hard as you can to understand the difference between innocence and guilt. And I thank you for having listened to me for this brief moment.
Thank you, Kwame. And we'll get to some questions about what happened in a little bit, but let's hear from Sabrina now.
You guys for having me. At the time, thank you. My name is Sabrina Smith. Thank you for having me. In 1989, my name was Sabrina Butler. I was 17 years old, living in a small town called Columbus, Mississippi. I had been on my own since I was like 14 years old, so I was trying to be a mother to 2 young boys at the time when my case happened. I was charged with the murder of one of my sons, and sentenced to die. My oldest child at the time was at his grandparents' house, and I was at home. And I decided to go jogging this night, and I put my younger son, to sleep in his bed. And I went jogging up the street for about 10 minutes. When I came back, I kind of knew when he would wake up, and so I went in the kitchen to get a bottle, took the bottle into the room where he was, and I noticed that he wasn't breathing. Right then, I panicked because I had never done CPR. I didn't know anything about it. So I just grabbed him and ran outside. And where I lived at, I had only been over there 4 months. So the people didn't know me at all. So when I started knocking on doors, one lady came to the door and she told me that her kids was in bed and she closed the door in my face. She wouldn't help me. So I had to run downstairs, and this was like 12 midnight almost. And when I ran downstairs, I was screaming, trying to get somebody to help me with my son. And a lady from the end apartment came out. She grabbed my son and she ran back in, took him to the apartment and put him on the floor. And she started CPR. When she started CPR, I ran out to the neighbors to get somebody to try to get to take me to the hospital because I had no car, no phone back then. And so the people that decided to take me, I did get somebody, rather. And I ran back in to get him. And when I did, the lady told me to hold his nose, blow in his mouth, and press in his stomach. Well, she told me the wrong way because I applied adult CPR to a 9-month-old all the way to the hospital, not knowing that wasn't right. I was just trying to get him to breathe. I was scared. I didn't know what to do at 17. So when I got to the hospital, the first thought came across my mind was that, man, you in so much trouble. These people going to lock you up. And I said to myself, I can't be honest. I have to lie. But never in a million years did I think that they would charge me with murder. I thought something like, I would get in trouble for leaving my son at the house by himself for that little time. But I didn't know that I was in for something way worse than what happened. So they came and they started asking me questions, and I just said anything. And they told me to go home. So I went home. I paced the floors at night. I was trying to figure out what had happened. Why did he stop breathing? I just wasn't understanding or, what was going on at that time. I was alone. I didn't have anybody. My family, nobody was with me. So the next morning, I got up and I went to the hospital to try to see what the autopsy report would say, not knowing that an autopsy report takes some time to do for them to determine what the cause of death was. So when I got there, the detectives were there and they said, we need to take you back down for more questioning. When they did that, they took me in this little room, and before I could sit down in the chair good, they started yelling, screaming at me, and they were in my face. They were acting like they wanted to fight me, jump on me. I was scared. I was crying. I was trying to, I collect myself. I didn't know what to do. Because that had never happened to me before. Had never been interrogated like that. So I didn't know what to expect. They screamed and yelled at me for about 4 hours. Everything I was in the middle of that 4 hours, I started saying, I'm going to try to tell the truth. So I started trying to say what happened. They didn't want to hear it by then. They just was taking everything that I said. They balled it up. They threw it in the trash. The detective finally wrote a statement, and he threw it in my face, and he said, now you sign this, because this is what happened. You beat your baby. You stomped him. This is what you did. So the only other act of defiance that I had left was to sign at the bottom of the paper. I didn't sign where he told me to. I just signed at the very bottom. And I felt like, then that maybe somebody would see that, that this is not true, what they're saying. I didn't kill my son. I didn't beat my son. And so that's when they charged me. They charged me with child abuse in the course of murder in the course of child abuse, rather. And they put me in the county jail. Sat in the county jail for a whole year before I even saw my attorneys. I saw my attorneys 2 days before trial. Ended up with two sets of attorneys one was drunk during the whole trial. The other one just didn't do the investigative work. They called no witnesses in my defense. None of the people who actually did the girl that did the CPR, nor the other neighbors, they didn't call anybody. And with that being said, they sentenced me to die. I was sentenced to die March the 13th of 1990, and my death date was July the 2nd of 1990. When I made it to death row, I was 19 years old. To be sentenced to death for a crime I never committed, it hurts to the depth of your soul. I mean, how can you wrap your mind around such a horrific thing? I lost my son. I didn't get a chance to grieve. That'll never be right anymore, even now. And he's been gone a long time. But to me, every time I speak, every time I tell a story, it's like it's today. My son's birthday is July the 4th. That's coming up. And the only thing I say to you guys is that I understand you got to do your job, but look what it does to innocent people. I am one. Kwame is one. Kirk is one. We can never forget this. Never. So I just pray and I hope that in your job that you will find the right type of justice for people that come before you. That's my story.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. So we're going to keep going, and Kirk, tell your story now that you've introduced yourself. Tell us more. Thank you.
Well, I've been listening to these stories for over 36 years, my own and different ones, and every time I hear these guys, I just want to tell you, Witness to Innocence is the only nonprofit organization in the United States and in the country that's by and for death row exonerees and their family members. We are, our programs like Accuracy and Justice is just to talk to folks like yourselves and convey a message of, we're not finger pointers. We're not trying to say anything about you guys. We're just, we know what the systemic problems were that caused our case. Now, I want you to think back in 1984, in July the 25th, 1984, a little girl by the name of Dawn Hamilton was found brutally murdered in a wooded area near her home. She was out playing hide and go seek on a hot, sunny day, and a search ensued for her killer. The person was described as 6'5", curly blonde hair, bushy mustache, tan skin, and skinny. Well, search ensued for this person that I was saying, and it turned out that the tip line at the Baltimore County Police Department came in about this fellow by the name of Kirk, was somebody's next door neighbor. I was living in Baltimore at the time. I had no idea what was about to happen to me. On August the 9th, 1984, I was arrested and would go through a 2-week trial for her murder, a child I never met in my life. Now, let me just say some of the things that went on. There was a police report about another fellow that came in 8 days before I was arrested. And so they never went back to check about this guy. And there was a reason for that. And they said because, they had their man, and that was me, they claimed. Now, I was arrested and sentenced and sent to Baltimore County, Maryland. I'm from the Eastern Shore of Maryland, so physically, by car, it's about 100 and some miles as the crow flies from where she was killed and where I'm from. I just happened to hitchhike up on 4th of July weekend to be with my wife, and wound up, we broke up, and a month later, we got married in April that year. She ended like Eastern Shore life. I was a commercial crab fisherman. My father was, his father was, and there's a whole line of us like that. And but I pined after her, something fierce, and I wanted to go back. Now, this thing was set to start on fire from the get-go. I want to tell you a quick little anecdotal story about the first lawyer I ever had. Now, I want you guys to picture the prison visiting room, okay? You go in this visiting room, and there's a brick wall. The lawyer comes in off the street, sits in front of you through a glass with his back to a brick wall. And I talk through this glass on the phone like this here to this guy. And the first thing out of his mouth, he says, "Kirk, you're in a lot of trouble." He said, "But don't worry about that. I know my way around the courtroom. I know my way around the criminal justice system. We're going to find our way out of here together." Actually, he started making me feel, he was boasting, of course, but he was telling me what he was going to help me. He almost intelligently thought that he knew exactly I was innocent. That's everybody I met from that day on, I would think so. We talk about the case for about 20 minutes. Right before he gets ready to leave, he reiterated what he said in the beginning. He said, "Kirk, I know my way around the courtroom. We're going to find our way out of here together." Picked up his suitcase or his briefcase and put his hand on the glass to say goodbye, turned around and ran right into the wall. He was right. I was in a lot of trouble, man. But it would only get worse from there. I was retried and reconvicted, and the state of Maryland tried to seek the death penalty in my case again. Couldn't get it. And I was sentenced to double life and sent back to prison. I was the first person, and I'm getting ready to try to cut this a little short, but I was a prison librarian for 7.5 years. So there's this new technology came out back in the day. It was in this book by Joseph Womble called The Blooding. And I read this book with rapt attention because of what it was about. It's about the first time this new technology called DNA was ever used in a criminal case. Oh man, I started remembering police reports, possible semen stain on underpants, it said. All these swabs and slides. I wrote the prosecutor. I said, "Look, I want to take," her name was Ambrose of Baltimore County, Maryland. I want to, talk to her, and she wrote me a letter, and she said, "We regret to inform you, Mr. Bloodworth, but the DNA has been inadvertently destroyed." I was looking for that evidence. And I was like, I was so mad at these people, man. I couldn't figure out, it had already been now. It was like on my year 8, and I was only 23 when all this mess happened, and I got one on death row. I just didn't know what was about to happen to me was going to explain it all, but it didn't do it for 19 years. Now, so my lawyer, he's the chief judge now in Washington, D.C. He's about ready to retire Superior Court in District of Columbia. His name is Bob Moore, Robert Moore. And so Bob, he did know his way around a courtroom and pretty much about anything. He worked on Southern state death penalty cases back in the 70s. This guy was something. And I was lucky enough to write this, appellate lawyer named Gary Christopher in Baltimore. He was the head of the appellate division back then. And I'd write that joker every day, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I would write on top of a letterhead, I'd just pick them and just keep on going until I found somebody to write me back. Gary did. And he got me Bob Moore. That was my lucky charm of, I tell people all the time, your life in a death penalty case or any kind of criminal case that involves life or any kind of time shouldn't be relegated to a treasure hunt, because I'm looking for this evidence, because I didn't believe that they had destroyed it. I didn't think they knew where it was. That was the whole deal. Sure enough, my lawyer, Bob, he goes and looks and can't find the evidence. It's not where it's supposed to be. He come back and tells me, he said, Kirk, they probably destroyed it, like they said, whether it was inadvertent or not, So I said, you got to go back one more time and check, man, because something ain't right. That stuff ain't destroyed. We just had it in the trial we just were in. It's got to be somewhere. What did they do, And lo and behold, he goes back and checks again. It's not there. He happens to pass my law clerk in my second trial, and asked him. They knew each other. Said, Bob, what are you doing? He said, I'm looking for the Kirk Bloodsworth evidence in the Dawn Hamilton murder case. And he said, well, I know where that's at. It was in the judge's closet, in a paper bag, in a cardboard box, sitting in the floor. Finally, I had the evidence I needed. Unfortunately for me, 5 months before I was released from prison, after the DNA had come back, it took a whole year. In January of 1993, my wife, my mother passed away. She was my biggest supporter. And I talked to her at Christmas time. She had told me that I was going to get out of here, Mother's intuition, I guess. I would never see her alive again. I was allowed to go to her funeral. And I say her funeral, I was allowed to go to funeral home flanked by 2 guards with 9mm pistols. Kissed her goodbye and went back to prison 5 minutes later. That was my life. So fast forward now. I got a pardon from the governor, William Donald Schaefer of Maryland, for my trouble. I received $300,000 for to compensate me for my time on death row or in prison for 9 years. It's like $3.97 a day. One of the biggest things that are some of these men and women didn't get a nickel, and some didn't get enough. Nobody can get enough for this stuff. 27 years, 16 years old on death row. Come on. We even if it's 9 minutes, it's a minute too many. It is now 2003. I'm sitting in my office and the phone rings. And on the phone, it said Baltimore County government on a ID thing. I didn't think that they wanted to, I didn't want to talk to them again because it didn't turn out too good last time I did. And on the other line was the prosecutor who called me a monster in 2 different trials, saying she had some evidence about the Dawn Hamilton murder case. And it turned out that this guy was so close to all of us. In fact, he was only 1 tier below me for 5 years and never said a word. And he wasn't 6'5". He was 5'6" and 160 pounds. Witness identification is one of the worst things that could happen. Witness identification for people like us who get convicted, and forced testimony and all this other stuff. Forced, to getting somebody to sign something that shouldn't have been to sign. Sabrina should have had a lawyer sitting right next to her. Not to mention Kwame up there. So in closing, I'm going to say he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. For the rest of his national life will not start. And that guy was the 8-day-old police report that came in that they never checked. I'm telling you, you got to pay attention to what we're doing out here. I thank you all for your time and I'll be glad to take any questions, starting with Richard, I'm sure.
Thank you, Kirk. Thanks all of you. Before I get to some other questions, I understood, Kirk, that there's a U.S. statute, a law named after your case, or you.
Oh, yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, actually, you and I were involved in that to some great extent. We, Richard and I, when I first got out, I went and spoke to Congress. I'd only been out a week. I haven't even talked to my grandmother yet. I was like going up to Congress to talk to these folks about innocence and the death penalty. Don Edwards subcommittee, am I remembering that right?
Yep.
On innocence and the death penalty. And so they never really, somebody wanted to know about innocence and everything. And at that time, it was like 30 some, right, Richard? It's now 168 of us altogether.
People freed from death row.
Freed from death row. And so I worked with the Justice Project before I came here at Witness to Innocence as the executive director. I was a program officer there, and you know, Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont said, "Look, you know, I got a surprise for you." So they named this whole law. It's called the Kirk Butler Post-Conviction DNA Testing Program, and it gives monies to states to defray the costs of post-conviction DNA testing. Today, we're over 50 now who have been exonerated, and the money just got, you know, put back in there for some more. So it's called the Bloodsworth Grant, and it forwards money to places like the Innocent Project and so forth.
Wonderful. Kwame, we heard from your brother here, Kirk, about how DNA saved his life. You didn't have that kind of thing. How did your case get turned around? What, all those years later, what changed? And what should have been done right the first time?
Never should have happened. But no, I would say that there was a 3-4 magnificence that came together in my case. That being the actual 12-year-old kid at that particular time, 40 years later would recant his statement. I ran into a very good lawyer who was versed with old law, and the most important part of it was that he also gave me good guidance and sent me to an investigator who was a kid who I didn't believe in at first, and we had to grow on each other. But he was the one that actually brought the entire case to light and my struggles to get everything out there in the public. Yeah. So it was a combination of wanting to happen. The guy who, you know, everybody called a snitch and an informant actually was a misguided child, coming to terms with himself over the years and recanting his statement. And then the greatness in the law, the legal team that I had to write the grant, the writs and everything to go into the court procedures.
Did the media get involved in your case at any point before you got exonerated?
Yeah, so this was the third person I mentioned, which was Kyle Swenson. He was a young kid. He was a freelance writer, wrote for various magazines, but at the time he was writing for the Cleveland Free Press. And he and I met, and he was just 24 at the time. And I said, "Oh, man, you know, my case is older than you, you know." But he proved out to be a very good gumshoe reporter. This guy went into where I'm from, was the lower east side of Cleveland, and he went down there where you hardly ever seen Caucasian men, you know, except for they were getting robbed, you know. And but he come up out of there with some evidence and things that the cops didn't have in their reports back in 1975. And so Kyle wrote a story entitled "What the Boys Saw." And it went into that magazine and out into the world, and didn't hit big, you know, didn't hit big at all. Some people observed it. At the time I was working for the county, and one of the ladies there was sitting next to me reading and crying. I asked her what was wrong, and she said She said, this young boy, he's Ronnie Bridgman. And, you know, and I said, man, she's talking about me, you know, and I immediately became emotional, you know. She said, "No, I could just tell they just railroaded him. It's did him so wrong," you know. And she threw the paper down and got up, and I read. I said, "Oh my God!" So I took the paper home, you know, shared it with my wife, you know. And I just thought, man, it's gonna take off, you know, but it didn't. It fizzled. The most at that particular time, the most reaction to it actually came from the court, which was, to my surprise, the you know, the new younger lawyers and prosecutors that had never heard of this case was calling and contacting myself and Kyle, asking, was this true? And you know, to their chagrin, you know, it turned out to be not only true, but something that they would have to compensate us for down the line, you know. So, but this kid, man, he did some things with that pen, and it is so true that the pen is mightier than the sword, because Kyle Swenson did that for me.
Thank you. So I want to ask Sabrina, now, when did you have a second trial? How did you get out? And if you did, you know, how did things differ the second time from the first time you got tried? And didn't they still have this statement that you signed and all that? Was that still used against you, or how did it all break down as time went on?
My case was overturned in 1992. The reason that it was because the initial attorney on the first case wrote the brief, and I ended up with two sets of attorneys. One was named Butler-Smith.
Just talk a little louder.
Came into my case, and he argued the case before the Supreme Court. And when he argued the case, that overturned the case. And when it was overturned, the district attorney did not have any new evidence. So I sat in the county jail an additional 3 years before I even went back to trial, because he used the same stuff that he used in the first case. I had a different set of attorneys. It's the reason why it turned out different. The witnesses who were not called in the first trial were called. They all took the stand, and we found out the medical evidence, what was wrong with my son. He had heart problems, kidney problems, and chronic bowel syndrome. It was nothing that I had did to cause this in the first place. When the attorney brought that to the jury's attention, they saw that it was never a crime. Although they used the same statement, the district attorney used the same statement, my attorney put the guy that wrote the statement on the stand and found out that he actually did that himself. They had like 30 minutes missing in between each one of my statements. And he brought that to the jury's light to let them know that why is this stuff missing in between the statements when, you know, she's supposed to have committed this crime like you guys say. Well, then why is it missing in a book? So he brought that, and then they showed the police officer. He asked the police officer to perform CPR on a teddy bear that he brought, and the teddy bear was the same size, height, and weight as my son. And so when he gave the bear to the police officer, the main police officer who wrote the statement, and asked him to apply CPR, he did the same thing I did. And he said, well, you just killed the child. You don't even know how to do CPR either. So that just goes to show you that when a person is scared and fearful, they're like, you don't know what you would do if you're not trained to do something. And then, and the reason why I signed the statement to begin with was because I didn't really understand the Miranda rights at the time. I thought that you have the right to remain silent meant be quiet until spoken to. That's what I thought. And so that's why I try to speak up for children, because a lot of kids, especially African American children, do think that, you know, especially if they've never had a brush with the law. And that was the thing for me. I did not understand my rights at that time.
Did you have any other children, and did anything you learned from your other children about what happened? And
I had an older son at the time, but he wasn't with me at the time that the incident happened. He was with his grandmother.
But subsequent to your case? I mean, did any other of your children have a disease or?
Oh, yeah.
And
I also have a 17-year-old daughter today that has the same that my son died from. It's called polycystic kidney, and she has hers is not as bad as yours, but she does have it, and it is horrific.
So, what happened to your son who died was probably a result of a pre-existing condition that he had.
It was.
And that your daughter also has now, but managed to live through it. And
well, he had heart problems, kidney problems, and chronic bowel syndrome. And I really truly believe that at the time when this happened to us, we moved in a neighborhood that had a power plant that made cross ties for railroad tracks. And they were pouring creosote on these cross ties. And everybody in the neighborhood, a lot of people came up with, they died from cancer, they had problems, they had all kinds of problems, and it was such a big suit they brought it. And I think that my children, out of all my children, have some kind of problem that came from living over there in that vicinity. So that's what we think it really came from. It was environmental more so than hereditary. I say hereditary, but I believe that it was because she doesn't have the heart disease, nor does she have the bowel syndrome like he had. And his was worse than hers.
Yeah. Before I turn this over to other questions from the audience here, could each of you offer one change you'd like to see in the criminal justice system, either that affected your case or that you've heard about from the stories of others? Where do we start? Or we don't just have to pick one thing, but I mean, what needs to change? What comes to mind without giving your whole laundry list? I know you'd like a lot of things changed, but where would you start? Kwame, do you want to start, and then Sabrina and Kirk?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm always for fairness, equality. So, and this is categorically where witness to innocence sits anyway in the movement, is that first and foremost, you have to be fair, and this is a great thing in life saving. So my thing would be if we can't have just that smoothness, the equality that is not being perpetuated amongst our legal societies, then I think that those things that really act as a more so as a hindrance than a deterrent to life and liberty, which is mass and false incarceration, and of course capital punishment, should just be done away with. That's where I'm at with that, and that's why I fight so hard in this movement.
Thank you. Sabrina, you have one thing you'd like to see different? Or?
Yes, I would like to see that if they haven't started it already, the way that they treat juveniles. I think that the Miranda rights, even though it is a layman, it needs to be a little bit more like so that a child can understand, because you can't expect a child to understand something so big as that when, you know what I'm saying, they're being accused of something. So I really think that needs to change. That needs to change. So that's what I advocate.
Yeah, you were 17 at the time that you were read these things that you understand, and
right.
Kirk, you want to offer us some wisdom?
I don't know how much wisdom I can give you, but I certainly will say this, that you go far enough in life, you'll be able to see what the best practices are. First thing, lineup procedures, double-blind sequential testing, all these different things that need to happen. They're both Sabrina and Kwame should have had lawyers present when they were talking to police officers. They weren't old enough. From the first time she was arrested, she should have had an attorney with her, somebody to, talk about this case versus, trying to make her look like she done it. And also follow up. When the police report came in on the Baltimore County Police desk about that guy, they should have went right after. the sad part of it up, because they didn't, he went and attacked another woman 3 weeks after I was arrested. So, you know, like Sabrina says, and Kwame, you play fair, and but you know, don't overlook nothing. This ain't about your life. It's about the life of the person that you're sitting there saying, or somebody is that you know, they're the guilty party. Man, make sure that, I think you almost have to disprove some of this stuff before you put it in front of a jury.
Yeah. Well, we want to have any questions from any of the people who are listening. It's not a huge crowd. I think if you speak up,